Welcome to Soroka Speaks, the podcast for human-centered leaders and those looking to deepen their personal development. We're so happy to have you here, and we hope that you enjoy this episode. What is going on, everybody? We're so excited to be back here with you today for another episode of Soroka Speaks. My name's Emily Haruko, and I'm joined here today with my beautiful co-host.
It's Claire.
And we have a extraordinary guest with us today, accomplishment coaching coach, published author, speaker, podcaster, and one of Soroka's finest coaches and facilitators. I am very pleased to welcome Dionne Nicholls Germain.
It's so good to be here. Thank you for having me, both of you.
We're very excited. We're going to dive into all things coaching and fashion, ironically, but most importantly, conquering unforgiveness and how that contributes to the workplace and to leadership and the benefit to our personal lives as well. So, Dionne, why don't you take us on a little journey? We're going to get into the book, but I want to start a little bit with this 25-year career in fashion that you had in New York City. A Caribbean girl hailing from Ottawa, Canada, all the way to the Big Apple. Tell us a little bit about the journey from Canada into fashion and into your career in New York.
Yeah, so that was always the dream. My first job in high school was working at Hudson's Bay. I'm in the fashion department. If anybody knows that, it was the longest running department store in Canada. And I couldn't wait, just to get with the clothes. And I always dreamed to be a buyer. And I really thought that's the route I was going to take. I was going to move to Toronto to headquarters. But of course, what happens? You end up falling in love. So I met my college sweetheart. He had big dreams to work on Wall Street, and I had these big dreams to work on Fifth Ave. So I'm happy to say we both got to live that out. My first job working for an Italian company, Italian cashmere house. So that brought me to Italy. And then eventually I went to a German fashion house, more focused on, they called themselves like the Chanel of Germany, called Rina Longa. And that was a wonderful experience. But it's when I actually went to Sonia Rykiel, is the name of the fashion house. And I got to go to Paris 4 times a year. My single mom, immigrant, as you mentioned, from St. Lucia, having the foresight, to put me in French immersion was the only way I was able to actually land this position, because you had to be able to work and speak in French. But I felt like I was home when I landed on, Parisian turf. And that was probably my most memorable experience, other than the fact that because I worked in women's wholesale luxury fashion, it did take me to the most beautiful places, even in North America. So yeah, this small town girl was wide-eyed, had some of the best experiences. However, the story continues because somewhere around 40, I just felt like there was more I was supposed to do. And that's what began my purpose journey, if you will, which led me to coaching.
So tell us about that bridge. When did you decide to leave the fashion industry and start your coaching career? And what was the impetus for that move?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, 20 years singular career. I'm actually 40 at this point. I do have a son, and I just felt like there was more I was being called to do. I did not see this coming. I really thought fashion was the be-all end-all. Didn't quite have my finger on it. At some point, I thought I was going to be a kindergarten school teacher. I loved when my son was a sponge. If you saw my kitchen, it was like a mini daycare when he was going into kindergarten. So I loved that age. Interestingly enough, at that point, I was already separated from my son's father. And just when I was at this crossroads, he happens to reach out to me and says, Dionne, I want to launch a financial literacy youth program. Will you help me? And I'm like, wow, it's still educating, still empowering the next generation, just in a different way. So that was one of my first lessons in life, where your gifts don't always come packaged the way you expect them to. And so before you know it, I ended up saying yes. We'll talk more about the fact that I'm actually launching this with my ex. That's a bit of where that forgiveness journey begins. But we ended up creating the nonprofit, creating the curriculum. Before you know it, we're in high schools, youth organizations, bringing this into under-resourced areas, actually, typically where we don't get this information. We're reaching young people around the tri-state area, hundreds, eventually thousands. Then the administrators, the teachers, they want to know, how do we get this information? So we end up launching a podcast. 5-star rated podcast is born. It's called Two Black Guys with Good Credit. I'm the lady with the facts. And now we're reaching thousands of young people around the world. And I'm like, okay, I'm using my voice. I knew that, but it still didn't feel like it was my thing. It still felt like it was his dream. He was the finance guy, you know? I brought my gifts and talents, don't get me wrong. But it was actually when I met my boyfriend, now husband, who had just hired a coach, and he's a real estate broker. And so, he's in his mobile office a lot. So sometimes he'd be taking his sessions in the car. So I'd get to be a fly on the wall in some of his sessions. I'm like, wow, this is fascinating. And so when his coach was looking for new registrants, she was a accomplishment coach, leadership trainer. I reached out. And I really still thought I was only going to use this to do empowerment events. I always had a heart for women. And lo and behold, it's 7 years later, and I'm still coaching and went from life coaching to executive coaching, leadership development, partnering with amazing organizations like Soroka and working with leaders and founders around the world. And so that's how I got here.
Well, I think one of the things that we want to talk the most about and the work that you're doing in the world is highlighting this book that you wrote. Is it 3 years now? 3 years?
Already 3 years now. Yeah.
Yeah, 3 years ago. So the 90-day Conquering Unforgiveness Journal. And you've started to take this work all over the country. I'm sure you have plans to take it even further, but you're weaving this work not only into people's personal lives, but also into leadership teams and business. And maybe before we get into some of those results, tell us a little bit about where did this book come from? What was the inspiration behind it? And why did you feel the call to write it?
Yeah. Well, can I just be honest? I ran away from it for a while. I knew there was something, a divine nudge, if you will, that I'm supposed to share my story. So going back to, I mentioned I launched a nonprofit with my ex. Not typically customary. What happened was, on a personal level, as I mentioned, I had met my college sweetheart at 19. And as I said, moved to New York. Again, from the outside looking in, it looked like we were living the dream, got the brownstone in Brooklyn. We had a son together. We're traveling, all the things, working in our careers. But I noticed about 10 years in that anytime I'd broach the conversation around marriage, he would sort of tense up, like a deer in headlights. Eventually, what I came to find out is that he was being unfaithful. So he was actually stepping out of the relationship. At this point, we had a son together, and I really wanted my son to have both parents. I didn't have that growing up, and neither did he. But unfortunately, even though he promised that the infidelity would stop, it didn't. A few years later, I ended up finding out he has a secret child who was he was already 3 years old at the time when I found out. And believe it or not, I actually still chose to forgive at that moment. We were able to blend our family beautifully. However, a few years later, come to find out, I actually get an email from a woman. And at that point, I said, thank you. I can now start the first day of the rest of my life. I felt like the little inner voice was already getting louder and louder. So by the time I got that email, it was like that release. I will say, I wasn't a coach back then. My faith was nowhere near where it is now, but somehow I just knew intuitively. In this case, it's not always like this, but somehow I just knew for me to create my next chapter, to really make room for that, for me to actually make room for the good love that I actually believed I was worthy of, and above and beyond all of that, I knew what I was committed to, and that was my son's well-being. That he would know, no matter what, whether we were together or not, that we were a united front, that we loved him, and that we had his back. And I'm happy to say we were able to create a really healthy, loving co-parenting relationship where we could take family trips together. Fast forward, we actually flew him out just a few years ago. He's a senior now, but we flew out together to get our son situated at Georgia State University. He's a college student now. So that's actually where my forgiveness journey began. I just saw all the beauty and possibility that became available because I kept choosing forgiveness. As I mentioned, when I was at that juncture in my career where I was looking for something new, and when he reached out, we ended up rewriting our legacy and creating, just putting good into the world because I was able to forgive and we were able to come together, and our son was watching all of this and sometimes even helping us with the tech and what have you. So yeah, just so much healing generationally was taking place because that same program, again, because I said yes and forgave, that same program ended up getting commissioned to go and teach it at the Ottawa University, his alma mater. So now we're flying back and forth for 6 months, where by me going back home, I ended up rekindling my relationship with my father, who I was estranged from for 30 years, because he still lived there, and so does my mom. I would have lunch with him, when I would go into town. And before you know, I have my dad back in my life. And what I was dealing with there, unfortunately, he deals with mental illness. And when I was young, he would have those mental breaks, but he was very abusive in those moments towards my mother. So when you're 5, 6 years old, you don't really understand. So I just held on to that. You hurt my mom for a really long time. But in my adulthood, I came to realize that, you know what, he wasn't well. He didn't want to intentionally hurt my mom. I was able to actually get to a place of empathy and forgive. And
Mm.
so at 13 years old, my son met his grandfather. And by the time we actually launched the podcast, like we launched the program with a live podcast taping on campus just to get the buzz going. And I had both my parents sitting in the front row cheering me on, which I hadn't had since I was probably 5, 6 years old doing gymnastics. So just a little bit about why I'm so fired up about the power of forgiveness, just the limitless possibility, generational healing, exponential healing. You're freed up to step into your purpose. Like I wouldn't be sitting here with you today, most likely, if I hadn't chosen to forgive. So that's the personal side of things. And then on the professional side, what I realized working with leaders and founders around the world is that we're just really hard on ourselves as high performing high achievers, and it's holding us back. So I just kept hearing these recurring themes that, I'm not going to speak up in a meeting unless I'm 155% right, because if I'm wrong, I'm going to beat myself up for weeks. Or I'm so hard on myself, I'm not going to go for that stretch project because I'm so beat down. So just a bit of the professional side of why I feel it's not only just about resolving conflict and navigating relationships with others, but it's also the relationship and learning to forgive ourselves. So
Mm.
that's a bit about why I bring this message wherever I can in some of the more non-traditional spaces like corporate, government, military. We're peopling everywhere. People are peopling everywhere. We need this. So yeah.
Okay, can we talk a little bit about how, like what does forgiveness look like in action? How do we actually do it? Because there's like, you're sitting here and you're saying like, I forgave him and we were able to do this, the podcast and the curriculum and the training together. But I want to talk a little bit about like how do we put this into practical action in the sense of like what are some of the steps that people take? What are the practices that you support them to do to actually like embody forgiveness? Because in the story you told, you would have every right to kind of, cut your son's father out of your life, set your boundaries high, be pissed off, all of the things we typically might see in maybe a less conscious approach to co-parenting or to the journey of an untethered romantic relationship. Can you tell us a little bit about, because I'm sure the crossover happens personally and professionally, but take us through a little bit of like, how do we embody forgiveness? How do we do forgiveness?
Sure. I love it. You actually hit on so many key points, right? I think the part you mentioned that was key was conscious. There's what we do unconsciously when we're reacting from emotion. But when we can pause, and that's where the emotional intelligence comes in, and reflect, get some spaciousness around it, right? Is when you can start accessing something different, right? So if we even bring in the neuroscience, when we are in our heightened emotion, our amygdala, this part of the brain, is completely hijacked. So you're just reacting 0 to 60. But when you can actually regulate, maybe it is a few deep breaths, maybe it's some journaling, right? Doesn't necessarily have to be a guided prompt journal like mine, but actually taking time just to get it out of you and onto the paper. That's when you can actually start seeing a different perspective, maybe garnering some empathy. For example, with my dad, with time and space, I'm able to recognize, you know what? He wasn't well. He didn't want to hurt my mom intentionally. He's sick. So I was actually able to gain empathy for him. In my son's father's case, for example, commitment is a very powerful place to live from. So we talk about this a lot at Soroka, right? Where are you making choices from? Mood or commitment? If I had let my emotions run the show, Oh my gosh. I could have easily taken the bitter woman scorned route. I had lots of friends who wanted to go and key his car. I had some friends who, I had an Italian friend I worked with in fashion. He's like, Dion, want me to get my cousins and we can go take him in an alleyway? Like that would have been easy. That's the natural instinct. But to really slow down and make a conscious, deliberate decision to live out of my commitment instead. So it doesn't mean what happened doesn't matter. I
Mhm.
still get to honor what happened to me. And a lot of the work that I do, even before we start talking about forgiveness, is debunking a lot of the myths that we've learned, whether it's in our families, societally, right? And one of them is if I forgive, what happened to me doesn't matter, or they're getting off the hook. But when you recognize and really understand that forgiveness selfishly is actually for you, it's not about them. It's about your peace, your power, reclaiming your power, your joy, right? Your freedom. And so when I can also support people in a more empowered relationship to forgiveness, because now we understand it's actually a tool of empowerment. I actually say it's one of the highest forms of personal transformation because who you become on the other side of forgiveness is unrecognizable. My life is unrecognizable because I keep choosing forgiveness, right? So it's about the gold you get every time you forgive, mentally, physically, and emotionally. So when I also build that whole case for everyone that physically it's taking a toll on you because your cortisol levels, especially over a prolonged period of time, it's actually taking a toll on your sleep, your heart. You could literally damage your heart by holding on to unforgiveness. There's enough evidence-based research to know that it actually is potentially linked to cancer. Your immune system breaks down, your memory, sex drive. I could keep going. Things that people don't even think about. So from a physical standpoint, you might want to try forgiveness. There's so much studies to show over a long period of time at John Hopkins University. There was a study done with women. And what they noticed is that there was a through line with women who had bipolar and depression and anxiety. The root of it was unforgiveness. So I build a case even from that standpoint. But getting back to commitment, it's not to say what happened didn't matter. What happened to me rocked me to my core. You can imagine. But above and beyond the circumstances, once I've had a chance, I cried my eyes out. Don't get me wrong. You got it. It's better out than in. So get it out, release your emotions, cry, gonna punch, go to a boxing note, um, whatever, smash room, whatever you got to do. But get it out of you. Therapy, coaching. What are some healthy ways for you to process? And then once you've had a chance to do that, above and beyond the circumstances, what are you committed to? And then you take actions in service of that commitment. That's a very core part of my work is what it looks like. And I can give you think about Nelson Mandela. And I have so many examples, but I'll give you this one because I actually had a chance to go to South Africa and see the cell, this little tiny cell where he spent 27 years of his life, right? And he could have gone the bitter, resentful, vengeful route while he could have been seething in that cell. And yet he chose to forgive the very country that persecuted him. And wouldn't you know it, he would then become the president of that very country because of what he was committed to. Unity, peace. There's so many examples. People would say there's things that are off the table. He could have said that's off the table. No way. But if forgiveness is really for your well-being, so you can live your highest and best, then unfortunately, I have to say, PSA, spoiler alert, nothing's off the table. Forgiveness is for you, and that's why you do it.
One of the things that came to mind, Dion, with when you were talking about sort of forgiveness, and I really do. Well, one, the science that backs this, but before the science, I even believed how toxic mindset, keeping everything in, how that affects us physically. And I've got an autoimmune disease, and that is caused from stress and things that happened to me that I kept inside for such a long time, and it's now manifested into an autoimmune disease. So I, paid the price for not speaking up or for perhaps holding on when I should have forgiven, kept the anger inside me. I did not go to boxercise. I did not journal or anything like that. But one of the things that came to mind was how much ego plays in our ability to forgive, and how much when we hold on to our ego of I've been wronged, you slighted me, you deserve to suffer like I have suffered, and I need to be the victim, that so many people or men and women hold on to so much of that. I wonder how, if that's the ego talking, what is your experience around that?
Oh, you hit the nail on the head. Underneath it all, it usually goes back to two things. As you said, ego and fear. It's all the limiting beliefs, right? The stories we tell that hold us back, right? It's the fear of that vulnerability, even, right? You feel very exposed when you choose to forgive. But if I hold on to it, it feels like armor. It feels like I'm powerful, right? When I'm holding on to it. Meanwhile, it's the thing that's killing you, right? It's the one that's actually making you sick. That fear of, well, what if they do it again? Right. And so another myth, right? That forgiveness automatically means reconciliation. If you leave with nothing else from this session or this conversation today, is that forgiveness actually only requires one person. Reconciliation requires two, right? What if that person's already passed away? I'm using an extreme example now, but they've passed away. You're still living, but a slow death because you're harboring all these heavy negative emotions because your ego won't let you release that. So you're so right, Claire, that once we can get from here back down here where we can prime the heart open. So there's a very important reason why I have gratitude, for example, in my journal, because like forgiveness, when you practice gratitude, one, you're hitting all cylinders, mind, body, and soul. Two, it literally rewires your brain to look for the good. So again, it's a way to open up your heart, even in the most difficult situations. Now, I'm not saying I was happy that my son's father cheated on me. What I came to find out is that I'm grateful for him because he was actually one of my greatest teachers. And that's something, again, when we shift how we look at things, it's usually the most difficult people. Like the most growth happens in the most challenging situations. It's not in a white room with pillows and feathers. It's when you're out there, right? Facing life, the obstacles and how we overcome them is where the most expansion as a leader and person takes place. So I recognize that, wait a second, you know what? I met him when I was 19. Who I am now and 20 years later, what it taught me was how to find my voice, how to advocate for myself, to the point where one day I remember him saying, I don't know who you are anymore. And I said, thank you, because I was able to really stand, for what I believed in, et cetera. Can you imagine even working together? That was important. So it didn't feel good in the moment when I'm going through the situation, but now I'm seeing on the other side, I needed to build up that part of me. So you see how that works? So out of my ego into my heart, because I can get to a place of gratitude that even in the most difficult situation, I can still find something to be grateful for, which is then allows me access to forgiveness. For example, from a leadership lens, right? I talk about it through the lens of growth mindset, right? That we can, that's Carol Dweck's work, right? How people respond to failures and setbacks. Well, through a forgiveness lens, it works, right? You honor your emotions, right? Want to make sure we acknowledge what happened. And then we got to find a healthy way to process it. If you do not have your emotions, they will have you, right? It will come out in some unhealthy way. So take time to process that by having compassion as well, right? Of course I would feel this way. And then what's the wisdom? What's the lesson I'm supposed to gain, right? It doesn't feel good in the moment. Don't get me wrong. I did not want to have to, break up and put my son through all of that. I personally didn't feel I deserved what I went through. And yet, what's the wisdom here? What was the lesson I was supposed to gain? So I say, whenever we're pointing at somebody else, I always use this visual. How many more are pointing back at us? There's more. So there's always something we're supposed to gain. But as long as we're staring at them, we're not taking ownership for, and I always say, when I say the word responsible, what we're responsible for, not to say we're blaming ourselves for what happened, but what can I own so I can move forward? So we release the ego, get into our hearts, and then it gives us access to so much more, right? Possibility, perspective. Yeah.
And it's so, thank you. It's so powerful to take back the lesson, or to look at the lessons that we learn from everything, right? It's so powerful to go, what this happened to me, what am I going to learn from it, and who am I going to be moving forward? I am never going to be in that position again. Now, no, my worth has changed. My value has changed. I found, like you mentioned, I found my voice. You know, your ex said, I don't recognize who you are anymore. No, because I'm now living in my authentic, true self. And this is the voice that I now have, that I always was destined to have. I just had to live through these experiences, find the forgiveness and take the learnings to be the most incredible, Dionne, you are incredible human being. And it is always my pleasure to work with you. Take so many learnings from you all the time that I yeah, we're on a podcast, we do sessions together. And I think it is, you can see the work that you have done, that you live and breathe that. And I think that's incredibly inspiring, not only just to me. I know Em's smiling as well. For anyone that's not watching and listening, Em's smiling because I know that you feel the same way. But it's really doing the work and not being afraid of what's on the other side. And I think you mentioned that earlier, isn't it? It's what is possible when you step out of that place of fear and out of that place of anger and ego. What is possible on the other side, and who am I going to be?
I think you brought up a really important point because forgiveness isn't forgetting.
Mm-hmm.
It's not compartmentalizing and stuffing it down somewhere for it to, again, pop up in some unhealthy way. It really is about facing what is. That is actually what forgiveness is. So I hope I'm getting back to your original question, actually. What is it? It's a conscious, deliberate decision to release the unhealthy emotions that no longer serve you, regardless of whether that person deserves your forgiveness, whether they give you the apology. But yeah, you actually have to face and process the emotions. That's the active work. Forgetting is passive, right? Forgiveness is a very active process. So thank you for bringing that up. Yeah.
I love the distinction. I want to highlight that, where forgiveness has something to do with responsibility, but what we're talking about in that is not cause. I want to highlight that for anyone listening that, you mentioned that, just because you're practicing for forgiveness or you're taking responsibility for what happened, it doesn't mean that you were at cause for what happened. And I think of a little bit about the word responsibility, meaning the ability to respond, and forgiveness can be a byproduct of your ability to respond. And as you guys were just, talking, I was smiling in reverence for all of who Dionne is and the work that she does in the world and the results she creates with her clients. And I was also thinking, I was having a little chuckle because just like the meme or the saying, like, fuck around and find out kept running through my head. Yeah, and not saying like that that you stepped out, but your partner stepping out, but it's like the process of just fucking around and finding out, it's like life happens and that is the catalyst for you to discover more of who you are. Life happens, you go fuck around and you're going to find out, who are you? What are you made of? What's your character? What really constitutes your character? What are the foundations for, your values, your principles? And, in the absence of kind of fucking around, you might not find out. So that was also where I was just having a little chuckle to myself there.
Yeah, that's it right there. You really find out who someone is in the breakdown or in the, in the trenches. That's who you find out who you really are.
Yeah. 100%. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the work that you do in this domain in corporate, right? With leaders and teams. You talked a little bit about growth mindset. You talked a little bit about, speaking up in a meeting or going after that stretch project. Tell us, how do you work with people in this realm to support, creating forgiveness as a part of culture?
Yeah, well, a lot of it starts with the themselves. So that's a lot of where it starts first, because the more we can do it for ourselves, then we can do it for others. For example, what I find with high performing high achievers, because they don't give themselves much leeway, they don't have it for others. And so they're holding other people at such a high standard as well. And then that's where you're also finding the butting of heads, right? When, say, for example, I had a client she was looking for a promotion and she thought she was absolutely ready for it. But her boss thought, you know what? I'd like you to we used to get some coaching. And they ended up promoting this other person who she did not feel was as qualified. And she was really angry about that. And how I worked with her was, again, we have to get out of the ego, get clear on what are you committed to, right? What's the end goal for you? And when she was able to take time to really process, then she started recognizing that, and this is the other thing too, her boss was going to be out for this interim period. So that's why he was kind of stepped up in the meantime. Okay. On top of that. So she's reporting to him. So it's irking her to death. But by taking time to actually work through what are you committed to? And once you got clear on that, which was the promotion and her career, so now you're taking your eyes off them and going inward. So then what's in my control? So now I'm not victim anymore, right? I can take my power back and choose how I want to respond to this situation. And guess what she chose? To be the best darn partner she could be. Even when he fell short, how can I be the best support to him? Because he wasn't really that, qualified for that position. And guess what? She got the attention of not even just her boss, but senior leadership. And she got that promotion. But imagine she had gone the other route, trying to, sabotage. Because that's the stuff that can happen, right? We hold back on resources. We delay deadlines. She could have left him hanging if he didn't know an answer, but she chose to be support instead.
Those
So
are just some of
just an example. Yeah.
of where the ego can get in the way of, what we really want, and where that commitment is so important. And there's a little, ratio or equation is the word I'm looking for. This equation that I'm sure I've shared with both of you before, that I call C plus R equals O. So your circumstance plus your response equals your outcome. And that's a lot of what I hear you saying, Dee, in terms of like, the commitment piece is the outcome that you want. And there are always going to be circumstances beyond your control. But how you respond to those circumstances will either it will generate a particular outcome, but where you can get clear on the outcome that you want to create, that can then support informing how do you need to respond to these circumstances beyond your control in order to generate the outcome that you want to see. And that's what I really hear you putting this equation into work with this work of forgiveness and commitment. And yeah, really, really beautiful. Thank you
Yeah.
so much.
Good.
Any final?
Yeah, well, I want to ask just a couple of it's not around forgiveness, but it's just the next evolution of who you are as a leader and an inspirational and motivational speaker and author, because I saw that you have been in Forbes and most recently you were on national TV in Canada. So these are two sort of huge individual accomplishments. And I really want to give you the space to talk about that and share with us how that came about. And then really, what is next? What can we expect next from you?
Sure. So I have to say that even the most recent feature it was on Good Morning Ottawa. So again, that's where I grew up. It was such an amazing full circle moment, because what actually brought me back there initially was that I was being recognized for my forgiveness work by the St. Lucian Association there. They were celebrating their 47th independence. And because of that, them promoting this event, Good Morning Ottawa, got wind of it. So it was pretty cool to go back home. And that's a show I grew up watching with my mom all those years. And then to be able to bring this message of forgiveness where it kind of began, So that's how that happened. And then Forbes, that was just such a cool thing. Thanks to appearing on a podcast, Negotiate Anything. It's the #1 negotiation podcast in the world. And my dear friend, Kwame Christian, shout out to Kwame. I believe you've met him, Emily. Yeah, being on his show. So that's how that happened. And so you start on this journey. I did have a vision. I said, well, it's the thing that wakes me up every morning, right? What would the world be like if millions of people were forgiving themselves and others? So I want to thank you for any opportunity, any platform, any vehicle where I can continue to share this message. You just never know who needs to hear it. So yeah, I just want to say thank you, but these were other opportunities that allowed me to further spread the word,
I love that. I love that.
And
Thank
a
you.
word worth spreading indeed, my dear.
Yeah. May I
And
leave
then,
sorry, I'll let you go ahead.
no, I was going to say, and what's next? What can we expect to see from you?
Yeah, well, we were chatting up a little bit earlier. I'm really excited. I'm about to launch a live podcast show. Or a live call-in show, if you will. But it'll live on as a podcast. It's called The Forgiveness Revolution. And so it's going to be an opportunity for people to actually call in with their forgiveness scenarios and get live coaching on the spot. And I'll always bring a little teaching to it, at the beginning, bring in some live calls. And then there'll be times if people want to bring in, they want to celebrate a win. But I'm so excited about this to be able to, because you just never know when someone hears someone else's story, they could get something for themselves. So I'm really excited about this. So this April, stay tuned. Forgiveness Revolution series coming near you.
So exciting. I love the concept. That's amazing. I can't wait. Well, Dionne, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for sharing your wisdom, your beautiful, bright spirit with us and our audience. Just wishing you all of the best luck and momentum as you continue to take this work out in the world. So needed, especially this day and age and all the crazy things going on in the world. So continue to look to you for inspiration and example of what it looks like to live, peacefully from a place of commitment and continuing to embody forgiveness across the board. Where can people find you if they want to know more, if they want to follow along with you? What are the ways they can get in touch and stay up to date with what you're doing?
Yeah, so you can actually find me on LinkedIn at Dionne Nicholls Germain, Germain. Definitely subscribe to my LinkedIn newsletter, The Forgiveness Edge. I bring that bi-weekly with some great content around leadership and forgiveness. And then you can also find me on Instagram, Facebook, same handle. And my website's called Live Your Best Life for You.
Love that.
Love it. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today and for being here for another episode of Soroka Speaks. We look forward to seeing you twice a month on the podcast and following along on socials as you wish. Thanks so much for being here. Thanks for joining me today, ladies, and we'll talk to you real soon. Ciao. You've been listening to Soroka Speaks. Thank you so much for being here. You can catch us twice a month on the podcast to keep learning about how you can deepen your human-centered leadership and personal development. We'll see you next time.